Hey, thanks for joining me for the first episode of the Local Music Podcast. My first guest was Dennis Howard from WERU Radio in Blue Hill, Maine. We talk about community radio, college radio. We talk about how to be a DJ, his path of being a DJ. We talk about how to get your music on WERU. We talk about video stores and the actual existence of video stores here on the Mid-Coast, Maine. In 2019 and lots of other stuff. So hope you like it and leave your feedback. And this episode is sponsored by Acadia Music Group. We do music licensing, concert promotion. Check us out, www.acadiamusicgroup.com. You can also download the full podcast audio at that website. So enjoy it. Welcome to the Local Music Show, where we discuss how to make a living in the local music industry. We bring together venues, artists, service professionals, and music fans into one show that is something for anyone who wants to contribute to the local music scene. I'm your host, David Scott Norton. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, and chat with us about what's happening in your local music community. Today, I have with me from Community Radio 89.9 FM in Maine, WERU, music director and business manager, Dennis Howard. He's also the owner of the Opera House Video Store in Belfast, Maine. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad to have you on. So today we talk about, the local music community, and what better person to talk to than, the director of community radio here in Maine. So we have a few questions for you. I have a few questions for you, if you wouldn't mind. Just in general, I guess tell us about yourself. How did you get involved in community radio in the local music scene?
It would be a long story. I'll try to put it out there in a logical manner. I was a kid who always remembered the AM station in my hometown on. I think my parents had that on as much as the television, in the kitchen when my mother was cooking, or obviously in the car. So I grew up listening to what was a commercial but local AM radio station. And I think from a young age, I learned that I probably was not going to be a superhero or a California highway patrolman, which were the only two other sort of fantasy jobs at that time. But I heard disc jockeys introducing songs, or coming out of a set of songs, talking and just being social on the air. And I don't know how many kids in first grade go to their friends' houses, grab record players and their older brother's vinyl collection, and were at 6 and 7 years old playing Boston, ELO, Kiss, Foreigner, and back announcing the songs that we just recorded onto cassette tapes. And so I think early on there was this love of radio and being a DJ, and I applied in high school at a commercial radio station, which at that point was an FM station in my town, which was huge. And I remember they hired my friend who went with me because he wrote fun, fun, fun with exclamation points on the phone message, and I just wrote my name and phone number. So I got a hint then that you might have to show some enthusiasm for what you're doing when you apply. So I got to college and immediately started working at my campus radio station as a first-year student within the first few months as just an overnight disc jockey. And very quickly, you learned that you might have the midnight to 3 a.m. show, but maybe the 3 to 6 a.m. show guy won't show up, and then the 6 to 8 a.m. guy won't show up. So my first on-air at a radio station went 8 hours, and it was all overnight, that very first shift. And I realized at that point that I loved being on the air, even though there was no guarantee anybody was listening. There was something to playing music, looking around a studio, and being told, as I took over at midnight from the DJ before me, the music director said, "What are you going to play first? I'll load your first song because you've never done this before." And I remember I had, my personal collection or my roommate's collection of CDs. And I said, "Oh, here's Genesis's Invisible Touch. Let's play Invisible Touch." Because I was coming at radio from the way most of us thought of radio in the early 90s. You play the hits. And I thought that made me a very knowledgeable disc jockey. And immediately, in that second, everything changed when the music director said, "Oh, that is the big hit, but what song do you want to play on the air?" And I remember thinking, well, I'm only supposed to play the hits, not the album cuts. And she said, no, this is college radio. People want to hear something different. And something in that moment galvanized me. And as I said, that first 8-hour shift, which was supposed to be 3 hours and was all overnight, I realized I could grab any CDs in that radio station studio and play anything. And something about that lit a fire. And I spent way too much time at that radio station during 4 years of college, and realized that where the campus station would turn off during finals week or Christmas break or especially summer break, the college station would just turn off. And something about that troubled me because it reached 18 miles around the Lewiston, Auburn, and as we joked, sometimes Gray area. And it seemed to me not to really treat the listeners with a lot of respect, because if these people listening off campus would get interested in a show or the new music, and then you turned off every time the campus wasn't in full session, that seemed wrong. So with the help of some other students at the time, I appealed to the president of the college and said, we really need to let Lewiston, Auburn, and local residents come in and do shows when campus students aren't available to host the shows. And back then in 1992, Bates College didn't really view, I think it's safe to say, the Lewiston community with wide open arms. There was a divide that's not there today, I don't think, but between the campus and the community. So in any case, after much pleading and an experiment of summer 92 opening it up to the community, we found a way to make my campus radio station work as a college radio station while opening it up to the community. And something about that, attracting high school students to do shows or senior citizens who had been state representatives and loved French music, something about that I found incredibly appealing. And it obviously took a lot of time away from studies, but it became the focus and the love. And I remember finishing college and realizing that it would be nice to continue radio. And I immediately was hired by a commercial FM light rock station in Camden, Maine, which I found ironic that my first job after college was bringing me right back to the area I was from. But I took it because it was a solid offer. I was waiting to hear back from Rutland, Vermont. And I've always thought if I'd taken that job, my whole life would be different. But the Camden Light Rock station brought me right back to my hometown. So around friends and family, and here I am 25 years later. But what I learned early on after getting to commercial radio, after the freedom of community radio and college radio, where you trusted that anybody had something to say when they sidled up to the microphone and they were choosing their own music, very quickly it became apparent to me that there was a very limited selection on that light rock station, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was located in downtown Camden. But the older tracks you heard every day, once, sometimes even twice, and the current tracks, which at that time were Michael Bolton, Mariah Carey, Kenny G, they were played every 2 hours and 20 minutes. And even working for the station very quickly, I realized how different commercial radio was from what I had just spent 4 years doing. And during that time, I'd been the public relations director, the music director when the music director went home for the summer. I was general manager for a couple of years. So I ended up doing a lot of the jobs. And in commercial radio, I saw how many people worked there, but most of us were also selling radio ads. And that was the true focus of the radio station. There was some on-air talent, and I was lucky enough to get to do some on-air work with remotes, but I realized that it wasn't as fulfilling. So right about that time, shortly after I arrived there, there was a new commercial radio station coming to the Searsport, Belfast area, and they hired me away from that light rock station. And just the way the world works, I was young, I was inexperienced, I left without giving notice at the first station. When they found out I was going to another station, they threatened to sue me. And so basically I'd signed a non-compete clause after I'd already been working there a while. And I was barred from radio, newspapers, and television for something like 6 years or something. I couldn't, within 100 miles of Camden. So it changed my life. I didn't do radio for quite some time. And just the way these things work, I always believe this was meant to happen. I was working at a screen printing and embroidery company in Belfast that also doesn't exist anymore. And who was then the underwriting manager of WERU was inquiring about trading on-air spots for embroidered hats. And nobody at the company wanted to deal with custom orders. We had our own catalog designs, and doing individual work for people seemed like a hassle and not a lucrative line of work. We'd rather print shirts sold at LL Bean or in catalogs. We didn't really deal with locals, but I wanted to. And so I met the WERU underwriting manager. We went to lunch, and as we talked, I let it slip that I had done radio for 4 years and was really missing it. And he revealed that WERU had just moved from Blue Hill to East Orland. And the 35-minute drive from Belfast seemed better than an hour drive to volunteer. And he stayed on me. He would call me and tell me when the next training was. He got me over to WERU as a volunteer. So 21 years ago, I started volunteering and immediately started applying for paid work. Whenever a development director position opened up, I would apply. I didn't get it the first time. They hired a guy who would run a law firm. But when he left 11 months later, I slid into the development director position. This is 19 years ago now. And immediately I became a member of a very small, dedicated paid staff. And so at community radio, I suddenly met the larger group, not just the DJs before and after me. I met 300 active volunteers, 60 of them on the air. Wow. And immediately I realized these DJs love a genre. They're playing new music nobody's heard. They're playing favorites people haven't heard in years. They're playing deep album cuts. They take requests. And best of all, and this, after a long story, relates back to what you asked about, they played local music. I would hear people on the airwaves that were from Maine or lived in Maine. And that changed everything. Knowing that we had the ability to play an artist right next to somebody a little more famous, could be the next song, and maybe somebody tuning in for their beloved Shamika Copeland cut or their Ryan Adams song. Suddenly they're hearing somebody from Rockland, Maine who does honky-tonk music.
Right. That is awesome. So, that's a lot to unpack there, I guess. Some of the things that I was taking notes of when you were talking, was, so it sounds like you were like one of the first community radio pioneers in Maine when you got to college to expand their shows to the community. Is that? And
I would never have thought that, because I know that some community radio stations started, WERU started 30 years ago. I think some others have been around longer. But when you do look back at the timing of it, I do think that some stations had already begun. WERU had started in 1988. So they'd been on the air about 4 years before I came up with this idea. Now, I cannot remember the exact conversation or divine spark that did it. And it may have been in conversation with other students at the campus too, who were involved in radio and thought it was a shame. They loved doing their weekly show and thought it was a shame every time the campus approached finals or midterms or Thanksgiving week off, or we just felt it was a shame. You'd just get people excited to do a show, and then we were off the air, and then back on for a month, and then off, and somewhere. So it may not have been my original idea, but I was part of a group, a few people that really pushed for it. And looking back now, perhaps we were some of the first campus students to bring in people from the local community to do radio at a pre-existing station that already had a license and already had a group of people running it, but inviting community members to do shows. And I think you might be right. I've never thought of it. Somebody told me there was a Wikipedia entry for my campus radio station, and that I mentioned there with somebody else for starting it. So you might be right. Awesome. I just never think of that.
Well, I think the moral for for people listening who want to say, how do I, I'd love to do something. I'd love to DJ. I'd love to get in there, but how do I do it? It sounds like you just do it. Just
look at the low power FMs in Rockland and Belfast. They have sprung up, and there are some in Rangeley, I think. Right. And there are low power FMs in addition to the 300 college and community radio stations all around the country. And it usually takes that person willing to put themselves on the line or just make it happen. It's a lot of unpaid hard work, but if you love what you're doing, like any profession, you can sometimes make great things happen.
Right, right. And so there's many opportunities out there. It seems like that with the low power, everybody complains about the digital direct TV now, the what is it? The digital signal, took away your TV antenna. But what people don't maybe understand is that freed up a lot of bandwidth on the FM signal, and now you can get an FM signal, pretty easily.
I think when WERU went on the air, actually, in certain communities, our audio would interfere with people watching Magnum PI back in the late 80s. Something about the FM. Yeah, the FM frequency. We'd have to have one of our volunteers who's still here would volunteer to go out to their houses and work on their roof with an antenna, making sure that it would block WERU's signal so that they could actually hear.
I remember that sometimes your TV would get scrambled by radio, and then a lot of times, growing up in rural Maine, not a lot of stations happening, but you would hear like WABI come across the radio,
right,
on the TV station, channel 5.
TV station,
yeah, not just the radio. That's an opportunity. Is with technology is you have more opportunity to get on the actual radio, and a lot of people still do listen to the radio. Because data is pretty pricey for a lot of people on their phones. But I guess that's the other piece. You can do local FMs. You can go to existing radio station, community radio station, and you do podcasts. Like we're doing here. Very very little investment in your resources except for your time. And it sounds like the moral from your story is also, you took a lot of jobs. You take the midnight shift, the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock shift. If you want to get in, that's what you got to do. Right?
I mean, even now, many people, when they hear when I'm on each week, as a volunteer here at WERU, I still host a show, as you know, Friday mornings on air, 5:30 to 9. You mention those hours to people, and I always assume most of the world is awake for those, commuting to work, but the amount of people who say, "Oh, I'm not up that early to listen to that," and I think they might be talking about the 5:30 part, but then sometimes they say not even the 9 a.m. and I think, oh, right. I mean, so I'm still, after 29 years of doing radio, I'm still not on. I guess I thought morning drive was a great time to be on, but I guess to some people that's still not the ideal shift. Who would wake up at 3:20 every Friday morning to go in and do a radio show?
A lot of people. I mean, a lot of people
in
are
the middle
listening.
of the winter.
Yeah, it's tough, but there's a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people listening, and that's kind of it's not the new wave, it's the old school way of doing things. Get up in the morning, get up 4 a.m., get your day started. And
think of those commercial DJs who are on the air 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, doing the morning show. That must change their life.
It's commitment, and but I find I get most of my best work done at those hours. If I'm up at 4 a.m. and then I can get working by 4:30, 5 o'clock, I get a lot of work done, and plus I can turn on WERU and hear great music.
Yeah, that hour, I think a lot of new age, or as soon as you hit 6, we're into the Americana, which I always personally think is one of our best programs.
Right. One of the other things I noticed in your story, that people may not understand is the non-compete, the contracts, the laws, the legal piece of it. There's a lot in the music industry about that you got to watch out for, and I mean, you said you signed the non-compete to get into the commercial radio station.
That was a little, looking back, I mean, I was a naive 24-year-old, and how it happened was I was hired almost immediately by that station, and it was only after I'd been working there, I think my sales manager came around and said, "Oh, we never had you sign a contract, now that you work, you just sign this." And I remember it was multiple pages, and on the back page, and I remember, as a 24-year-old at your job, you're not really thinking of bucking a system, I just thought it was something I had to do. I think it maybe would allow me to get paid that first week or second week. So somebody standing in front of you saying, "Sign here." And I do remember it was multiple pages, and he didn't give me the time to read it or anything. And I was young and naive, and he said, "Sign it." And I'd already been working there a few days. So I said, "Oh, of course, yeah." Signed it and dated it. And I do vaguely remember just looking up, because it was probably like Appendix F or something. And I think it just happened to be on the top of that page. And I remember seeing something about, non-compete, will not go to another radio station, newspaper, television station with, for 100 miles for 6 years or something. And I remember I knew other people who had worked there, but as a 24-year-old, I just hadn't really thought about it when I signed it. And you're right, knowing that another station had officially hired me, immediately when they threatened that, the other station said, "Oh, we can't use you. We're not going to face a lawsuit before we even go on the air." So I was effectively out of radio for 6 years. And I do think that's something, somebody more experienced and older, or somebody a little more firm at work would have said, "Let me read this before I sign it."
Exactly.
And I just signed it. With a sales manager standing over you saying, "Sign it to get paid this week," it seemed like an appropriate thing to do.
Right. It's what you have to do. Yeah. And,
right.
And I guess that's, some knowledge, to put out there for somebody maybe in the same situation. I have the same things happen in my, business
really?
in general. I do consulting, and I have to sign non-competes, and depending on the situation, on do I need this job right now? Do I need to start next week? Or do I really need this? I sign it or I don't sign it. But the other thing people don't really realize is that contracts, they're amendable. If you have a contract in front of you and it says you're not going to go to work for another station, for the next 6 years or 5 years or whatever the terms are, you can always say, let's change that piece, let's change that part. And I think you get a lot of pushback, but I've been able to do that before and say, I like this contract, but I don't agree with this piece. And it extends the time, they have to send it back to their lawyers, or maybe the person there can say, yeah, let's scratch that out. But it's just something very important I think, for everybody to keep in mind, is when they're taking any type of job, you got to read the fine print, and be in the position where you're, able to say, give a little pushback. And that's hard for a lot of people. And like you said, when you're 24, it's, you need the job, you want to take it, you're excited. But there are some things to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I do remember being young and brash, and when the station that had hired me away had said, "Oh, we can't afford this," I remember saying, "I'm 24. I'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this." And I remember them saying, "No, we're not going to risk, bad publicity and bad." I mean, they could easily find another radio person, which they did, and the other station never had to file a lawsuit. I was just dropped. The 24-year-old was fairly expendable at that point. But I think what you say is right, and God knows, when talking about the music industry, how many legal contracts were signed by musicians who signed away their publishing rights all those years ago, and the wealth stayed with somebody who didn't even write the music.
Right. And I think the lesson, or I'm not sure it's a lesson, but one of the morals is, sometimes you have to get into these situations and sign these contracts because, you need it. You need the job, and you're focused on taking that. And maybe if you took a step back a little bit further, as you're older, your life is more in a line and under control. You don't have to jump at everything. And so that's one of the things I would, tell young people, is that, work on yourself and, get yourself stable so you can be able to do a little pushback to say, hey, I don't like that piece. If you want me, this is the way it's got to be. Sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's for the better.
It would have been interesting. They take that out of the contract and I'll sign it.
Yeah.
But,
or amend it a little bit, say 25 miles, say 2 years, say 6 months. That's a lot of times I do with my contracts. I've gotten mine down to where if somebody hires me to do a consulting job and it says, you won't do consulting, for the next 2 years, I immediately say, well, no, this has to apply to the client that you're putting me at. And for the project you have me on, I agree. I will not go back to your client and try to steal them from you. I will not try to steal customers or to steal money business from you. But you can always narrow it down. And I think people are usually open to that, to say, I'll do a non-compete, but, let's say 25 miles. Let's say it's not the same genre. And let's say it's, just something different. So I'm not competing with your business. Companies will sometimes agree to that.
I think that would be interesting in the music biz to to work on too. I can't imagine right now how negotiations go between record companies and musicians nowadays, as everything's in some ways shrinking in the national music industry. I do wonder if we're in another age where musicians are signing away a lot of either rights or their independence just so they actually can get one of those rare lucrative recording contracts.
Right. And I think they are rare, and I think they're not always lucrative. But I guess the moral is, ask somebody, ask somebody their advice on if you have something thrust in front of you, just take a step back, take a break and say, let me take this for a day and look at it. So the other thing I saw in your, story, notice in your story, for the local music is like, I love that community music, community radio plays local music. They play essentially whatever they want to play. And that is awesome. And so the question, if I have a band, if I have, if I'm a singer, if I have a CD or an MP3 or something out there, what do I have to do, to get on WERU? What's the, I guess, process? Is there a minimum quality? What do I have to know if I'm a local band and I want to get on the radio?
I mean, on WERU, I can speak to specifically, and I do talk to the music industry about 3 hours a week, every Monday midday, 11 to 2. I talk to managers, record companies, artists, radio promoters, because that's a weekly thing you have to do as a music director to sort of let people know the status of their new releases. Well, we are similar to many stations. Every station is different, but we're unlike some community radio stations or non-commercial stations in that we don't have quotas. Many stations like us, it's a way to make their DJs play even more new music or more names they haven't heard. They might say 3 times this hour, you have to play a CD from that bin there, or one of our new artists, or play this. WERU doesn't have quotas, and that's both good and bad. We have many DJs who will only show up and play what they've already said they're going to play. They've kind of mapped out their show in advance. That's increased over the last 10 years. And it's not my style of being a disc jockey. And sometimes I think it sounds more like being a syndicated radio show host. You have a program that you're playing from start to finish, and you just pause it when you talk and press play and let it play again. To me, that's not being a disc jockey, spontaneous in and of the moment. Then we have a lot of DJs, and most of them are those who have been here longer than the last 10 years. They are more responsive to doing their show on the fly in the minute, going to grab a request or going to grab something that looks good in the studio. We mark all local Maine musicians' albums with a blaze orange sticker, so that if they're from or live in Maine, their CDs on our shelves, both in the studio and our library, stand out. And to some of our DJs, obviously, to be totally honest, they don't care. They'll never look at those. They'll never play them anyway, or it's not a name they recognize. But to many of our hosts, and I don't know what the exact statistics would be, they see that and go, oh, here's somebody from Maine. Let me check it out. It's kind of our responsibility to play musicians from our state, because if we can't, who can? But as far as your question about how to get your music here with the greatest chance of getting it on the air, and this just speaks to who we are as a radio station. We get about 100 CDs a week from the overall industry, which seems like a lot, but it is true. It may be a little less over the last few years, possibly, but I think in the course of a week, if you add up everything we receive, it's somewhere between 80 and 100 a week, except for the few weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas when the industry goes on vacation. But if you're a local musician and you're sending your album here, that is really the most efficient way to get it recognized by us, because here in the music department, I will open up personally the envelope or the case or find it inside, and we'll keep them all here in some sort of priority. We'll listen to them as we go, and we'll pick some out to prioritize, but having it local right from the very beginning, I mark it so that everybody through the whole system and process knows this band's from Maine. And I will write on the blaze orange sticker, they're from Rockland, they're from Portland, she was born in Norridge Walk, those kind of things, which make good DJ patter, but also might make somebody play it if they're debating it. And one problem, though, and I feel bad saying this on the air, but I've tried to personally get it out there, just because of the station we are, a lot of times people have sent us CDs in an envelope, just a CD, or a cardboard sleeve with no spine. And I hate to say this, they're being very ecologically sound. They're not using plastic. They're not using much material at all. But just because of the sheer volume of music we receive, I feel bad saying this because on a shelf in back of me, we have 6 years worth of albums we haven't been able to get to yet, of albums sent in that condition. Right. Yeah, without a spine, when you're this kind of radio station, no matter how good your album is, whether it's in a digipack that you've paid for or whether you create something in a jewel case, if it doesn't have a spine, our DJs who are receptive to playing new music will never see it on the shelf. And
right.
So that's something I've personally told everybody interested in sending music here. If you're a local musician, just make sure there's a spine on your album. And some DJs would rather also it has track times and an easy to find track listing on the back. Those are simple steps that some people never think of. That all helps. It seems sometimes that the more genre specific you are, the better. Something that's a little more niche gets sometimes more play here than just an overall rock band. But that's up for grabs. It all depends on what DJs like. But as far as local musicians sending their music, it is CDs. Unfortunately, the radio station is not yet anywhere near having a system to accept electronic files in a way. We have nowhere to store them. We have no way to play them back on the air efficiently. There's no system. So individual DJs might play digital files on the air from their collection or that I forwarded them, but the station will never have that digital file, song, or album in any system.
Right.
And I do feel bad saying that because I know many musicians, it might seem cost effective to just record their music digitally and email it in. And sadly, at this stage, and I've been the music director here for over 8 years now, that will sit in an inbox. It'll never get opened and nothing will ever get done with it. So for now, it's definitely a CD with a spine.
Definitely, yeah. So I've seen your studio there, and I've seen those racks and racks of CDs, and I understand that it's like a library catalog, and you got to have your CD out there, and it's got to be a little catchy, I guess, a little attractive, put some artistic energy into it, I guess, just because people like just to see a good picture.
I think that's true. I think that sometimes that's what grabs the DJs. It's fascinating each week when we do put new music up into the studio. And like I said, it can be up to 80, 100 albums new each week. And then to see when I come in on a Monday morning, I count what's been played in the last 7 days. And sometimes it is fascinating each week to say, okay, what will get played? What will the DJs, because we are a station where I'm not making anybody play anything. I can suggest things, I can steer them in a direction, but in the end, each disc jockey is going to choose what they play based on what they want to play on the air, preferably within their genre, but some even push those limits. And so it's interesting to see each Monday morning what got played. And sometimes I do think, wow, maybe it really was that spine was more legible. The artist's name was so easy to read on the side, and somebody saw it. Whereas that one that's made an artistic font and it's black or something, nobody sees the name and doesn't even pick up the CD to listen to. And wow, little did they know there's somebody famous actually on that disc, but they never looked because of the spine or the cover art. Yesterday, I got an album from Amanda Palmer, who I think is famous for being married to Neil Gaiman, the author. She's standing on the cover completely naked on top of a rock, full frontal, completely naked, standing there. And I thought to myself, the irony is it came in a cardboard sleeve, so it could be a while before we get to anybody making a jewel case for it. But if that goes in the studio with that cover, is that going to ward people off, or will it make them check out the CD and listen to it more? That's a very good question. I'm sure Amanda thinks people will at least check it out a little more.
I think it would. I think, that it would make you check it out more, at least say, what the heck is this?
Who dares do this? What does her music sound like? She must be artistic. Right.
And, I think also, just having a little bit of quality, I don't think you have to spend a lot of money, to get good cover art or a good look. Hire a high school kid or find a friend or, network a little bit to get, some quality that people will see this CD cover and say, yeah, this looks professional. Because I think that goes a long way. Looking professional can get you further along than a lot of people know.
I think your albums, when they were your EPs, full disclosure, when they arrived at WERU, they met the criteria. They were easy to see. I think I spotted them on the shelf and said, "Oh, this sounds like the music we play in the air." And it was easy to read. I'm assuming you had track times probably, but I think you did.
I did,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, and the song titles were right there on the back of the disc. You didn't have to go looking anywhere. Sometimes you have to open lyric booklets, or there's no track listing anywhere on anything. And I think it helped, and it made other DJs check it out. And I think you're right. I think what you're saying is one thing that local musicians could help themselves with is making sure the finished product is DJ friendly and not necessarily the cheapest or most ecological way to do things.
Right. And, you know, in my first CD, I think it looks professional. It looks like a CD that a record company may put out. But it wasn't expensive because that first CD, I networked a lot and, worked with a big team of friends, who do things, on the cheap for me and volunteer their time. And, just we're excited to help me get something out there. So I think your CDs can be professional, and you just got to put a lot of effort into finding the right people to help you. So it's a lot of fun though.
It is, and local musicians have just as much chance to get played here as each week when I talk to the promoters who are calling from all around the country who have sent their artists in, who have hired them to promote their record. Many of those arrive without a spine, not a majority, but many arrive without a spine or without track times or without a listing on the back end. And I see it each week because those promoters wonder why DJs here aren't playing their artists. And I think sometimes it's because there was no spine and we're not creating anything for it yet. Other times it just, like you said, doesn't have appealing cover art, doesn't look very professional, looks like it was tossed off haphazardly. The music might even be good, but I think snap judgments made by DJs are, if they couldn't spend much on that, how good's their music going to be?
Sure. That's just a natural, human reaction, I think. And so you take just CDs. I know there's a system out there. I think it's called DMDS, where you can digitally distribute your music. I tried that with one of my songs. Of course, it doesn't go to community radio, and I don't know that it actually helped on the bigger radio stations either, because if you don't have the promoter, if you're not networked in, like you said, those emails sit in somebody's inbox. I'm sure they get thousands of them a week.
I'm looking right now at my WERU email that's unread. Right now, 64,619 messages. Yeah. Now, I try to jump on anything business related, anything I have to do for the music biz. But as a part-time music director, 20 hours, because 20 hours of the week I'm raising money through businesses to keep this radio station on the air, with only 20 hours to do music each week and a host of volunteers who help me behind the scenes, I really only have time each week for opening the mail, reading the one sheets that come with the CDs, counting the new spins that were played in the last 7 days, talking to the music industry for a few hours, doing the few airplay charts that need to be created, send out the results to the music industry. And that's the 20 hours each week. So sadly, this is indicative that I've never had time to go into email and open email messages from the music industry. And in those 64,620 messages, because it goes up by the second almost sometimes, right. Most of those are mass messages sent out by record companies, promoters, or artists. But some are even personal messages from musicians saying, did you get my album? Did you play it? I'd love to come to Maine and do a show. And sadly, there's just not time to ever even open those. And I would feel horrible in my personal life if I wasn't responding to messages like that, but there's just no time to do it. And that's why, like you said, sending a CD, we can't deny when I open that case that somebody mailed us that disc. Right. And it's here. We will deal with it. It's in our hands. As you just heard, and I'm sure I'm not the only music director who would tell you this, I just never will have time to open email messages and find an MP3 or a download link and it's just the way it's set up right now. I'm not saying that won't change at some point, but what you mentioned as how you sent out your music, I've never heard of that system. I know that the industry each week tells me to go to something called Play MPE to get the brand new single by this big name. Our station does nothing with that, and that has become the digital standard for most of the music biz, from what I can tell. There's also something called AirPlay Direct, which a lot of Americana musicians tend to use more than anybody else. But once again, we don't do anything with that. I've given the links to certain DJs here and said, feel free to grab something you like from there if you want it for yourself. But the station has no way to use it. But sadly, what will happen is if you are just mailing digital files to this radio station at this time, you'll never get critical mass enough to get enough airplay to ever be on airplay charts. You'll never be a name on the lips of DJs, or nobody will ever hear your music, because guess what? We've got 100 new CDs staring us in the face each week. We're going to grab those and play them on the air.
Right. They literally have more weight.
Right. They literally. They're hard to ignore when you have a shelf of new music and you're looking for something to play in your show. Are you going to dive through email and see if somebody sent you something you might want to check out?
Right. So, all right, we're hitting our time here. Anything else you want to mention about what's going on with WERU or with you in general? I noticed.
I mean, I will say WERU. I do think we do a very good job of including local music in our broadcasts. I think I used to have a more optimistic view maybe when I was development director and I wasn't so involved with the music here. I think I thought more DJs played local music like on every show, or if somebody had a local gig, we'd all mention and play it. I think that's been a harsh realization as music director over the last, and maybe things have changed. We've got new volunteers who maybe don't know that's how it used to be, but there's many good disc jockeys here who kind of look at posters, see who's coming to the area, who's got a gig, might play it, might mention the gig, and want to support local musicians. I do think we could improve. I think there are many shows where they could include a local artist and it would fit in with what they're playing and it would really make their show even more relevant. And surveys are telling us our listeners would love more live music and more local music. So it would behoove us to be even better at including local music on shows. But we do try as much as possible. And just this week, yesterday, when I completed the airplay charts for this week and discovered who the top 5 artists are of the week, a group out on North Haven is in, I think, 2nd place this week, 3rd place. Bait Bag, a trio of riot girls from North Haven, got more airplay here this week than the Decemberists. So it is possible for a local act on WERU to still get more airplay than national acts, and that gets shared by me with the entire music industry. Everybody sees that when I send that out, that right. WERU is playing Bait Bag more than the Decemberists. So I'd like to think in our own way each week we're helping the local music industry by making the rest of the country and the world aware of these artists that we're playing.
That's awesome. All right, and I noticed also online you have Opera House Video, which also seems pretty old school.
Yeah, I mean, if many people who don't know, who are not customers or aren't familiar with the store that's been there for 23 years, oftentimes think, is that even possible? How do you pay rent in downtown Belfast and rent DVDs? Well, it's same as the model here. Every Tuesday there are new releases. Obviously, we're in a golden age of television, so there are new seasons arriving all the time of things. And same sort of thing, local community members who live anywhere from Orland to Rockland. I've seen regular customers drive, and maybe every week, not every day. And to analyze the reasons would take somebody much more scientific and intelligent myself, but they range from people obviously wanting to rent local. One quote I heard in the last week was, well, I could go home and rent this for $15 and give it to that big corporation. Or it's a new release, I could come rent it from you for $4. So, right. And take it home. And you're local and you employ local people and you all live locally and spend your money locally. So there's some of that. A lot of times it might honestly have to do with somebody not wanting to pay high cable bills for entertainment, or people don't have internet or don't want it. Right. They don't have, there's a lot of our customer base who either have limited internet, like you mentioned earlier about data for music. I've had customers say, no way will their landlord let them use their internet for streaming anything. So they're coming in to watch it via that, or they don't have credit cards. The amount of our customers who pay with checks, who don't have a credit card or debit card to pay a monthly internet bill. And people remind me that with multiple streaming services now jockeying for your viewing eyes and your credit card, there are multiple. And as those get expensive and you're paying internet and you're paying data, it just, for a bunch of reasons, customers would do a better job at answering why they come in than me. But I just anecdotally hear the people that come in. And obviously I'm not talking to people that aren't coming in, but the people who do come in, I mean, there is a healthy customer base that we get through the winter of their discontent, and then
Right.
in the summer, the visitors and people staying here, whether it's for a day, a week, or the season, become regular customers. And yes, if you had told me last year that necessarily a video store in 2019 would still be profitable, not in danger of anything yet, it boggles the mind. But I love it. It's a passion. And I think it's the experience, if I had to really come at it from a non-provable, but what I feel in my heart, I think there's an experience. I see it in parents' eyes when they bring their children in to look at the family films or the animated films. One girl who moved here from New Jersey this year told her mother that there was this store in town where you could go in and see movies. She's like, have you ever heard of this kind of store? And the mother, who's younger than me, even said, well, yes, that used to be the way it was. And they become regular customers. They move to Belfast, and seeing parents dictating it as the viewing that their kids will do. This is the movie you're watching over the next few days, or this is your TV season for the week, and not unlimited screen time. There's some of that going on. But I really think when I see on the faces of people who have all the other options and still come in, I think it's about the experience. They're going to bring something to the counter, ask me what I think of it. They're going to talk to another customer. Did you like this? Or what have you seen that's nominated for Oscars? Or, oh, I didn't know this came out yesterday. Wow, you've got A Star is Born? Oh, I thought that was still in theaters. Those kind of things. Who knows? I'm not an expert enough to know how the industry will shake out. Everything's saying that this is impossible, non-sustainable, days are numbered. But I can just tell you at this stage, we're standing there and we're paying the bills, and people come in and reopen an account that's been dormant for 5 years, or come back who have been away a long time, or come in new and have never been a customer before. And the best quote I ever heard was from a customer who walked in and said, look, I've got Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, and I can't find anything to watch.
Right. I think it's still very viable business personally, and I think the idea of Blockbuster, of course, you see why they went out of business, and to do this, nationally, yeah, there's too much competition. You can't hold that market, but I still think from your, like what you're saying, from your experience, there's a big local market, for this type of entertainment, and for a gajillion reasons. Every once in a while we go over our budget and look at our monthly charges of stuff that we subscribe to, and we don't have cable or satellite here, but we do everything through the internet, and eventually as a couple months roll along, well, we've signed up for Hulu, and then we want to watch this, so we signed up for Amazon Prime, and we signed up for Netflix, we signed up for this. It just builds up and builds up, and then every few months we just purge them all and say, let's just go get some videos from the video store, because it gets expensive. It's not cheaper to just to go online, and it is. I think it is more cost effective just to get your videos at the video store,
kind of a la carte.
Yeah. So,
I do think what was the original blow to the kneecaps was when Netflix was first created, and it was the DVDs by mail. I think to true movie lovers, that definitely seemed like a much more affordable option to avoid late charges and have 3 at a time sent to you, and then you'd send them back. The next thing would be sent to you. Even then, people were coming in saying they didn't have the patience to wait for it to arrive, so they would still rent something that night. But I think that was the biggest blow. I would agree with you that streaming, even though the world would say that is way more popular and profitable, and I do think that has never been the death blow that perhaps the original Netflix by mail was, because for all the reasons you just mentioned. I see people return who say they canceled Netflix because they couldn't find anything, or they saw Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, but there's nothing else they want to watch, or especially Amazon Prime. They say, wait a minute, I have to watch it within a few days if I buy this title, and it was $15 for the new release. What? And they come in. And I don't want to be arrogant, and I know there's nothing that says the next year at this time we'll be there. There could be, I mean, this could be, the world's changing all the time. But I agree with you. I think that 50% of the customer base worries about money as the reason they spend money. If you become a customer somewhere, I think half the people are doing it because of money alone. So they're going to go where the cheapest option is. And I do think Netflix by mail and streaming options got people in the thought process that was a cheaper option. But you're right, as costs rise, and as you just referred to about your family looking at your monthly expenses, and with the imminent arrival of a Disney streaming service on the horizon and multiple others competing, at some point will people be spending money on every single streaming service out there? It might be nice to, if you don't watch much a month, a $4 rental might seem a lot more affordable than, like you said, those monthly subscription bills.
Exactly.
So I don't know how it'll shake out, but yeah, I think that's half the people are coming for the experience, I'd like to say, and the price really doesn't matter to them, and they just shrug off any amount of late charges because they know that helps keep a store there, and they're getting what they want to watch, and they like this experience far better, touching the case, looking at the back, reading who's in it, seeing how long it is, and just that feels more tactile, and they're going to choose it no matter what. But I do think 50% are by cost, and that's cheered me a bit to have people realizing, like yourself, that it's actually cost-wise, it might sometimes be cheaper to just rent what you watch instead of paying for the potential of stuff that you don't watch.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you still do free popcorn on Friday nights?
We do.
Okay, yeah, Netflix, Amazon, nobody's going to send you free popcorn to watch your movie
that
on
is
Friday
very
night.
true. And it's made fresh right there by the employees. They make it on a Friday night and give it out. Usually make enough that like the first customers on Saturday morning get the leftovers. But yeah, we do that. I got that idea when I was in Tucson once, and by then Netflix streaming was beginning. But I was in Arizona and I was in a video store, and I saw a line snaking around the store all the way out the door. And granted, the weather was a lot warmer. And I said, it was in February, and I said, wow, because already I'd heard about the death knell to video stores. This was 2007. So streaming was definitely beginning, and Netflix by mail had been around for years at that stage. And I remember being in this big city and wondering, why are there so many people in line? This is incredible. And as I looked around the store and saw, oh, they have a Susan Sarandon section, a Tom Cruise section. That's an interesting way to do it. They group by actor, too, and director. But then I realized, oh, they're all in line because there's a popcorn machine. They're getting free popcorn while they browse. I was like, that's a great. So I came back and, told the owners at the time, and they loved that idea. It's right. You're not going to get that from your online providers.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks, Dennis, and I'm really glad you joined me today. Don't go away. I want to chat with you a little bit more, but I'm going to wrap this up. And so this has been Dennis Howard from WERU Community Radio, 89.9 FM. Check out their site. We'll have the links posted in the podcast, and also Opera House Video in Belfast, Maine. What's the address there for the video?
We're at 109A Church Street. We're across from the police station and next to Left Bank Books.
All right, so check them out for your video needs. Kick out Netflix, kick out Hulu. I'm going to do it.
Thanks, David.
And thanks for joining us. And this has been the Local Music Podcast. I'm your host, David Scott Norton, and I will talk to you all soon.
Hey, so that was episode 1 of the Local Music Podcast. I think I called it the Local Music Show in that first episode, but kind of working out the kinks, and there's more to come, and I'm going to broadcast my first 3 episodes here, one today, one tomorrow, one on Monday, and then a brand new one on Tuesday. So check it out. Also check out www.acadiamusicgroup.com, and thanks again to Dennis Howard, WERU Radio in Blue Hill, Maine, and we'll catch you later.